May 8, 1884, Harry S. Truman was born in the city of Lamar, Missouri. His parents were John and Martha Truman, and they worked and lived on their farm for all of Truman's early life. In 1906, at the age of 22, Truman moves home, where he works and lives on the farm with his parents, until his father passes in 1914, where he takes over management. However, in 1917, with the introduction of the United States into World War I, Truman volunteers to become a soldier. At 34, Truman is sent over to France, where he sees combat twice. He would come home in 1919 and marry his childhood fancy, and with a friend he met in the army, he would try to start his own shop. However, the business never took off, and instead he would move to politics in 1922. He ran for county judge and eventually won. After a failed re-election and later a successful one in 1926, he decided to move up the political ladder. So, in 1934, Truman ran for Senate and won for the state of Missouri. He would win his re-election in 1940, giving him another 6 years. The 6 years would never be served, however, and instead he would go on and run for vice president. However, after 82 days, Roosevelt would step down as president because he kinda died. This was only the beginning for Truman, and he made sure to do as much as possible during his presidency. For instance, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the 1940s, but there was this thing called World War II going on. Japan, being a part of the world, was at war. Their main target towards the end of the war was the United States. So, Truman was left responsible to end the conflict. He weighed his options carefully and decided not to send an invasion to Japan's mainland, as there could be up to 500,000 lost Americans. Instead, he decided to... And then he asked Japan if they would surrender. They said no, so Truman decided to... Again. And this time, the bloodshed of 100,000 men, women, and children in Nagasaki and Hiroshima on August 14th, Japan decided to surrender. After some more conflict in the Pacific, on September 2nd, World War II had come to a close. However, despite the end of the war, we would see a new conflict arise. The Soviet Union had been a huge victor in World War II, and had extended its western border to East Germany. Now, there was a country that covered 15% of the entire world, and they were doing something America didn't like. The USSR had been spreading communism around the world, and Truman decided that's not cool. The Truman Doctrine had been signed March 1947, and it was meant to contain communist geopolitical spread around the globe. It was a message to the rest of the world that communism sucked, and you shouldn't do it. Also, we'll give you money if you don't do it. In 1948, Truman would go on to win a second term and then do a bunch of boring stuff for the rest of the year. A notable exception would be the Berlin airlift. After the war, Berlin was split into 4 sections, each owned by a different nation. The United States, France, and Britain owned the West, and the USSR owned the East. America, France, and Britain joined theirs together, however, Russia kept theirs to themselves. To simplify a lot, Russia was bad to their people in East Germany, and West Germany was very cool and got things the other side didn't. For instance, food and rights. However, people can live without rights, but they'll die without food. So, it was in the hands of the West to figure a way to feed them. Truman would pass a program in which they would fly food and supplies and drop it for the East to use. With the help of the United Kingdom, they were able to fly 2.3 million tons of supplies over 11 months. The USSR decided to loosen restrictions on shipments, and this was a major win for the West. However, this wouldn't be the end of the USSR, and in 1949 they had officially made their atom bomb, and thus began the arms race between the United States and the USSR. In retaliation, Truman approved the development of a hydrogen bomb. For comparison, the 2 bombs dropped on Japan were collectively 36 kilotons. The first test of a hydrogen bomb by America was 15,000. The biggest one on record was 50,000. Needless to say, this was a huge escalation of the arms race. But before any H-bombs were detonated, a war in Korea broke out. Truman did not wait for Congress to approve, and instead sent troops over immediately. American and South Korean troops were pushed to the tip of the Korean peninsula. However, MacArthur was able to bring the communists to the 38th parallel. It has since changed, but mostly stayed around the 38th parallel even to this day. Even with this victory in South Korea, MacArthur wanted more. He kept pushing and was eventually met with heavy reinforcements by China. His response to this was to ask to nuke China. However, after hearing this, Truman removed him of his command. Besides desegregating the military, something that was never heard of in America till then, Truman's notable presidency ended there. Truman would go on to enjoy his retirement and would frequently go on walks in his state of Missouri until the 1960s, when his health rapidly started to decline. On December 26, 1972, at the age of 88, Harry S. Truman would pass away in Kansas City, Missouri. I would also like to mention that his middle initial, S, stood for nothing, and it was in fact just the letter S. Other than that, Truman would go down in history as one of the most influential presidents and also one of the most controversial. Despite having a boring and almost depressing beginning, living with his mother until he was 38, he would go on to become one of America's greatest presidents.
There can be no peace in the world until the military power of Japan is destroyed, with the same completeness as was the power of the European dictator.
Darling, I have only one desire.